Before Rome rose, before the pyramids fell silent, there was Babylon, the city that ruled both earth and imagination. Born from the mud of the Euphrates, it became a shining vision of order, beauty, and divine ambition. Its walls stretched for miles, its towers pierced the sky, and its kings claimed to speak for the gods themselves. The world called it Babilu, the gate of the gods. To some, it was paradise. To others, it was arrogance made stone. In this 10-part story, we'll uncover the truth behind the legend. We'll see how a small settlement grew into the heart of an empire under Hammurabi, how Nebuchadnezzar turned it into the most dazzling city ever built, and how its temples, gardens, and myths shaped every civilization that followed. We'll explore its gods, its laws, its downfall, and its rediscovery thousands of years later beneath the sands of Iraq. This is not just the story of one city, it's the story of humanity's oldest dream, to build a kingdom that reaches the heavens. This is Babylon, the gate of the gods. Long before Babylon became a symbol of power and myth, it was just another small settlement on the plains of Mesopotamia. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was the cradle of civilization, where farming, writing, and organized rule first took root. Around 2300 BC, Babylon was little more than a collection of huts surrounded by mud brick walls, but it had one critical advantage: location. It sat on a fertile bend of the Euphrates, a perfect crossroads for trade routes linking Sumer in the south, Akkad in the north, and Elam to the east. Goods, ideas, and stories flowed through it, and with them came ambition. The city's rise began in earnest when the Amorites, a Semitic people from the west, seized control around 1894 BC. They brought with them a new dynasty and a vision that would change history. Under their leadership, Babylon grew from a provincial town into a powerful city-state, gradually absorbing neighboring territories. Its people developed advanced systems of irrigation, commerce, and administration. Temples were built in honor of the gods, especially Marduk, the local deity who would later rise to supreme prominence in the Babylonian pantheon. By the time a king named Hammurabi took the throne, Babylon was ready for greatness. The city's streets buzzed with merchants, priests, and scholars. Its scribes etched cuneiform tablets, recording everything from trade deals to star charts. Babylon was no longer a humble town by the river. It was becoming the heart of Mesopotamia, a place where law, religion, and empire would soon converge. The world's first superpower was awakening, and its name would echo across thousands of years. When Hammurabi ascended to Babylon's throne around 1792 BC, the city was already strong, but under his rule, it became something entirely new. Hammurabi was more than a conqueror. He was a strategist, a reformer, and above all, a lawgiver. Through diplomacy, cunning, and war, he unified most of Mesopotamia under Babylonian control. But what truly set him apart was his vision of order. He understood that an empire built only on fear would crumble. What he sought instead was justice, justice that would bind his people together long after the wars had ended. To achieve it, Hammurabi commissioned one of humanity's first great legal codes. Carved into black diorite stone for all to see, his code contained nearly 300 laws that touched every part of life: trade, marriage, property, labor, and crime. Each law carried a clear principle: fairness must replace chaos. The strong could not simply exploit the weak, and even the king himself was subject to divine law. At the top of the stele, Hammurabi is shown standing before Shamash, the god of justice, receiving authority from the heavens. This image was more than art. It was political philosophy in stone. His laws were direct and severe. If a man destroys the eye of another man, his own eye shall be destroyed. If a builder's house collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. Harsh, yes, but revolutionary for their time. They established accountability and structure in a world that had long been ruled by power alone. Hammurabi's code was not just a legal text, it was a declaration that civilization itself depended on order and morality. Under his rule, Babylon became the intellectual and spiritual center of Mesopotamia. Temples rose, canals brought prosperity to the fields, and trade expanded from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Hammurabi called himself the shepherd of the people, chosen by the gods to guide humanity. And in many ways he did. His vision of justice outlived him, shaping legal thought for millennia to come. The great experiment of empire had begun, and at its heart stood Babylon, a city ruled not merely by men, but by law. To understand Babylon, one must understand its gods, for in this city, divinity shaped every act of life. The Babylonians believed the universe was a realm of divine order and chaos, constantly in tension. Their duty was to preserve harmony through devotion and ritual. At the center of their faith stood Marduk, the great god of creation and wisdom. In earlier ages, Marduk had been a local deity, one among many in the Sumerian pantheon, but under Babylon's rise, he ascended to supremacy. Kings proclaimed that Marduk had granted them rule. Priests declared him king of all gods, and Babylon itself was redefined as his earthly dwelling, the Bab-Ilu, the gate of the gods. Marduk's rise was immortalized in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. In it, Marduk defeats the chaos dragon Tiamat, shaping the world from her shattered body and establishing order among the heavens. Humanity, the story said, was formed from the blood of a defeated god, created to serve the divine and maintain the balance between heaven and earth. This myth reflected Babylon's worldview perfectly. Civilization was not just survival, it was sacred duty. The king ruled as Marduk's servant, responsible for ensuring justice, performing rituals, and upholding cosmic balance. The Esagila temple, dedicated to Marduk, stood at the heart of the city beside the mighty Ziggurat Etemenanki, the temple tower that inspired later stories of the Tower of Babel. This towering structure reached toward the sky, symbolizing the meeting point between gods and men. Its top was said to hold a shrine where the divine could descend to earth. Each year, during the festival of Akitu, the statue of Marduk was carried in procession through the city as thousands sang hymns and prayed for renewal. The ceremony reaffirmed the bond between the divine and the mortal, the belief that Babylon itself was the center of the cosmos. But Marduk was not alone. The Babylonians worshipped a vast pantheon: Ishtar, goddess of love and war; Shamash, god of justice; Nabu, patron of wisdom and writing; and Nergal, ruler of the underworld. Each deity had temples, priests, and followers, and their influence extended into every corner of daily life. Omens, astrology, and rituals guided decisions from farming to war. The stars were read as messages from the gods, their movements recorded on clay tablets by scholars whose precision would one day form the foundation of astronomy. In Babylon, faith was not just religion, it was infrastructure. The gods were not abstractions, they were the unseen machinery that kept the empire running. To defy the gods was to invite ruin. To honor them was to ensure prosperity. This belief gave the Babylonians both humility and confidence. They saw themselves as chosen to preserve the divine order of creation, the guardians of the balance between chaos and light. And as their devotion deepened, so too did Babylon's power, for no empire rises on strength alone, it rises on belief. After Hammurabi's death, Babylon's unity slowly fractured. Successor kings could not hold together the vast territories he had conquered, and over time, the empire weakened. Invasions, rebellions, and shifting alliances eroded its stability. By the 16th century BC, the Hittites swept down from Anatolia, sacking Babylon, and soon after, the Kassites, a mysterious people from the Zagros Mountains, took control. For centuries they ruled, blending their traditions with Babylonian culture. Though not native, the Kassites revered Babylon's gods, restored its temples, and kept the flame of its greatness alive. But by the 12th century BC, their power too began to fade, and in the chaos that followed, a warrior king emerged to reclaim Babylon's glory: Nebuchadnezzar I. Nebuchadnezzar I reigned around 1125 BC and became the first ruler since Hammurabi to unite Babylon under strong, independent leadership. His most famous campaign was against Elam, a powerful kingdom to the east that had humiliated Babylon by capturing the sacred statue of Marduk decades earlier. To a Babylonian, this was more than theft. It was sacrilege, the physical removal of their god from his home. Nebuchadnezzar's victory over Elam and his triumphant return of Marduk's statue to the Asagila temple was a moment of divine restoration. The priests declared it a miracle, proof that the gods once again favored Babylon. Under his rule, Babylon experienced a political and cultural revival. Temples were rebuilt, the economy revived through trade along the Euphrates, and the city's influence spread once more through Mesopotamia. Nebuchadnezzar I also restored the city's festivals, particularly the Akitu, the New Year celebration, which symbolized the renewal of divine favor each spring. It was said that as the statue of Marduk was carried along the processional way, citizens wept, prayed, and sang hymns of gratitude. For the first time in generations, Babylon felt whole again. His reign marked the beginning of what historians call the First Babylonian Empire, a time when Babylon reasserted itself as the spiritual heart of Mesopotamia. Though later dynasties and conquerors would rise and fall, Nebuchadnezzar I's legacy endured as the prototype of the ideal Babylonian king. A warrior chosen by the gods, a protector of Marduk, and a restorer of divine order. His victories revived a national pride that had nearly vanished, setting the stage for the golden age that would come centuries later, under another king who bore his name, Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar I's triumphs reminded the world that Babylon was not merely a city, it was an idea, a covenant between man and the divine, capable of death and rebirth. Even when its walls crumbled and its kings were overthrown, Babylon's spirit waited beneath the dust, ready to rise again in glory. More than 500 years after the reign of Nebuchadnezzar I, Babylon rose again to dominate the ancient world. The man who made it happen was Nebuchadnezzar II, son of King Nabopolassar and ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. His reign, beginning in 605 BC, marked the city's most brilliant age, the moment when Babylon became not just powerful, but legendary. By this time, Assyria, Babylon's ancient rival, had fallen, and Nebuchadnezzar set out to build an empire that would eclipse all others. His armies swept across the Near East, conquering Syria, Phoenicia, and the Kingdom of Judah. Cities surrendered at the mere mention of his name. Those who resisted, like Jerusalem, were crushed. Tens of thousands of captives, including the Jewish elite, were exiled to Babylon, an event that would echo in biblical memory as one of history's great displacements. Yet while Nebuchadnezzar's wars established Babylon's might, it was his vision of the city itself that defined his greatness. He turned Babylon into the most magnificent city the ancient world had ever seen. The city's walls stretched for miles, massive enough, it was said, for chariots to race side by side atop them. Inside those walls, broad avenues cut through a landscape of temples, palaces, and gardens. The most famous of these streets, the processional way, was lined with lions in glazed brick leading directly to the Ishtar Gate, a monumental gateway of dazzling blue tiles adorned with golden bulls and dragons, symbols of Marduk and the goddess Ishtar. Through that gate, visitors would enter a city so rich in detail and symmetry that it seemed almost divine. At the city's heart stood Etemenanki, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, a towering temple that reached toward the heavens. It was here that later generations would imagine the Tower of Babel, a symbol of human ambition and divine challenge. Nearby, the Esagila temple complex served as the center of religious life, where priests conducted rituals to maintain cosmic harmony and ensure the favor of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar expanded both structures, ensuring that Babylon's splendor would match its power. The king's inscriptions often credited Marduk with his success, declaring that all he built was done for the exaltation of Babylon and the glory of the gods. Under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, art and science flourished. Architects perfected the use of glazed bricks, creating vibrant colors that shimmered under the Mesopotamian sun. Engineers built massive canals that irrigated fields and supplied the city with water, while astronomers recorded the movement of stars from temple observatories. Babylon became a hub of learning, trade, and worship, a living symbol of civilization itself. To its people, it was the center of the world, the place where heaven and earth met. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was not only grand, it was designed to inspire awe and fear. Every brick, every statue, every gate told the same story. Babylon was eternal, and its king ruled by divine command. Even those who despised its power could not deny its wonder. For travelers and captives alike, it was unlike anything they had ever seen, a city that seemed to touch the sky. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon had fulfilled its destiny. It was no longer just the gate of the gods. It was the throne of the world. Among the many marvels that defined Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, none captured the human imagination more completely than the Hanging Gardens. Ancient writers described them as a mountain of greenery rising in the heart of the city, terraces of stone covered in trees, vines, and flowers that cascaded down like waterfalls of color. The air was said to shimmer with the scent of cedar and jasmine. Streams of water flowed down from the top, feeding an impossible oasis in the middle of the desert. They were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and for centuries they stood as a symbol of beauty, power, and love. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built the gardens for his queen, Amytis of Media, who longed for the forested hills of her homeland. The Babylonian plains were vast and dry, and to ease her homesickness, the king ordered a miracle. He commanded his engineers to create a living mountain of stone that would mimic the landscapes of her youth. The result was unlike anything the world had seen, a fusion of architecture and nature that defied gravity and climate alike. Scholars have long debated whether the Hanging Gardens truly existed. Some claim they were destroyed long before the Greek historians described them. Others argue they were misattributed and may have been built by the Assyrians in Nineveh. Yet the persistence of the story tells us something vital about Babylon's reputation. It was the kind of city where miracles seemed possible. The people of the ancient world believed such beauty could only exist in Babylon, because it was already seen as the earthly reflection of paradise. If the gardens were real, their construction would have been an engineering marvel. They likely used a system of stone terraces supported by vaults and pillars, with layers of reed, asphalt, and lead to retain water. The entire complex would have required an ingenious irrigation system, perhaps powered by early versions of Archimedes' screws or chain pumps to lift water from the Euphrates River. Every drop that reached those terraces was a triumph of human ingenuity, turning dust into life, wilderness into wonder. The Hanging Gardens, whether myth or memory, embodied the soul of Babylon, a city that refused to accept limits. It was not enough for Nebuchadnezzar to build walls, temples, and towers that touched the sky. He wanted nature itself to obey him, to bend and bloom in defiance of the desert. The story of the gardens is a story of love, yes, but also of power, the power to create beauty that rivals the gods. In that ambition lay both Babylon's genius and its doom. For no city that reached so high could escape the jealousy of time. At the heart of Babylon stood one of the most awe-inspiring monuments of the ancient world, the great ziggurat known as Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This massive step tower rose hundreds of feet above the city and was dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's chief god. It dominated the skyline, visible for miles across the plains, a man-made mountain reaching toward the heavens. For the Babylonians, it symbolized the sacred bond between gods and humans, a bridge linking the earthly realm to the divine. But to later generations, it became something else, a cautionary tale of pride and punishment, immortalized in one of history's most enduring legends, the Tower of Babel. The story, preserved in later Hebrew texts, tells of a time when all humanity spoke one language and sought to build a tower high enough to reach the heavens. But the gods, or in later retellings, the single god, saw this ambition as arrogance and struck humanity with confusion, scattering them and giving them many tongues so they could no longer understand one another. The tale was likely inspired by Etemenanki, whose immense scale and divine purpose made it the perfect symbol for human ambition. To outsiders, Babylon's towering ziggurat may have seemed an act of hubris, a city so proud it tried to climb into the sky itself. In reality, the Babylonians saw no rebellion in their creation. They built the ziggurat not to challenge the gods, but to honor them. Each level represented a step closer to the heavens, and at its summit rested a shrine where priests performed rituals believed to maintain cosmic harmony. The structure itself was a map of the universe, the base representing Earth, the middle the sky, and the top the realm of the divine. Climbing its terraces was not an act of defiance, it was a spiritual ascent, a symbolic journey from the mortal to the eternal. The ziggurat also served a practical and astronomical purpose. Babylonian priests, who were among the world's first astronomers, used its height to study the stars and chart celestial patterns. From its upper platforms, they tracked the movements of planets and recorded eclipses on clay tablets with astonishing accuracy. For them, the heavens were not mysterious. They were a divine language waiting to be understood. In Babylon, science and religion were not separate forces. Both were expressions of the same truth. The universe was ordered, and mankind's duty was to read its signs. Yet even as the Tower of Babel became myth, its deeper message endured. The story of confusion and scattered tongues reflected the fragility of human unity, the constant struggle between cooperation and pride. Babylon, the city that once claimed to unite the world, would itself one day fall to division and conquest. But its tower, the dream it represented, never truly disappeared. Every age has built its own version of Babel. Cathedrals, skyscrapers, rockets, digital networks. Each one is an echo of that ancient desire to reach higher, to understand the divine, to make the earth itself a bridge to heaven. And in that timeless ambition, the spirit of Babylon still lives. For all its glory, Babylon's splendor could not shield it from the decay that follows every empire. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar II, the city began to fracture under weak rulers and internal strife. His successors lacked his vision and strength, and the unity that had defined his reign dissolved into court intrigue, religious conflict, and political chaos. The empire's wealth remained vast, but its purpose had withered. When Nabonidus came to power, the last king of Babylon, he further alienated his people by neglecting the city's patron god, Marduk, in favor of Sin, the moon god. To the Babylonians, this was not a matter of preference, it was heresy. The high priests, merchants, and citizens turned against their king, and by the time Persia's armies marched west, Babylon was divided within and vulnerable from without. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great, king of the Persian Empire, began his campaign against Babylon. His armies moved swiftly across Mesopotamia, defeating Babylonian forces at Opis, near the Tigris River. As Cyrus advanced toward the capital, Nabonidus fled, leaving the city in the hands of his son Belshazzar and a weary population. Babylon's mighty walls still stood, towering and intact, but morale had collapsed. Cyrus's generals found a way to exploit the city's lifeline, the Euphrates River. They diverted the river into a nearby canal, lowering its level until Persian troops could march through the riverbed beneath the walls. On that fateful night, while the Babylonians celebrated a festival, Persian soldiers entered silently through the river gates. By dawn, the gate of the gods had fallen. What followed was not massacre, but transition. Cyrus was a conqueror unlike any before him. He ruled through respect and integration rather than destruction. When he entered Babylon, he declared himself chosen by Marduk to restore order. The priests, disillusioned with Nabonidus, welcomed him as liberator. Cyrus restored the temples, reinstated the worship of Marduk, and released political and religious exiles, including the Jews, allowing them to return to Jerusalem. The event would be recorded in the Cyrus Cylinder, one of history's first declarations of human rights. Babylon became a jewel in the Persian crown, no longer independent, but still magnificent. Its wealth, artisans, and scholars now served a new empire that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. Yet its identity as the center of the world was gone. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, Babylon was no longer the master of Mesopotamia. It was a subject of a greater power. Still, its spirit endured. The Persians adopted much of Babylonian culture, from astronomy to administration, blending it into their own systems. In this way, Babylon lived on, not as an empire, but as an idea embedded in every civilization that followed. The fall of Babylon was quiet, almost graceful, as if the gods themselves had tired of conflict. Its towers still gleamed, its gates still shone blue, but the divine fire that had once defined it was gone. The city that had reached the heavens now bowed to the earth. And yet, even in defeat, Babylon remained eternal, a name that would outlast the kings who conquered it. Under Persian rule, Babylon remained a city of wealth and learning, but its golden age was gone. The temples still stood, priests still recited hymns to Marduk, and merchants still traded along the Euphrates. Yet the pulse of empire had shifted east to Persepolis and Susa. The Persians treated Babylon with respect, maintaining its grandeur, but they ruled it as a province rather than a capital. Over time, the great ziggurat Etemenanki fell into disrepair. The upper terraces crumbled, the walls cracked, and the sacred tower that once symbolized the connection between heaven and earth began to fade into dust. Babylon's people remained proud, but they were now subjects of kings who spoke foreign tongues. The city that had once ruled the world was now just one jewel among many in a far larger crown. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in 331 BC, Babylon opened its gates to him without resistance. The city had seen countless conquerors, yet Alexander treated it differently. He was fascinated by its history, its legends, and its wisdom. He ordered repairs to the temples, restored sacrifices to Marduk, and declared his intention to make Babylon the capital of his new world empire. For a moment it seemed as though the city's destiny might rise again. Scholars, artisans, and priests returned to service, and the streets filled with life. Alexander walked the same processional way that Nebuchadnezzar had once built, imagining himself as heir to the kings of Babylon. But fate intervened. In 323 BC, at the height of his power, Alexander fell ill in Babylon's palace and died within its walls at just 32 years old. His death plunged his empire into chaos, and the dream of Babylon's rebirth died with him. In the centuries that followed, shifting rivers and neglect slowly strangled the city. The Euphrates changed its course, leaving Babylon's canals dry and its soil barren. Successive rulers stripped its bricks to build new cities. By the time the Parthians controlled Mesopotamia, Babylon was a ghost, its temples abandoned, its ziggurats reduced to mounds of clay. Yet even in ruin, the name Babylon carried power. In Jewish and Christian scriptures, it became the symbol of decadence, pride, and sin, the great city that defied the divine and fell by its own arrogance. To the Greeks, it remained a place of wonder, remembered for its gardens and its walls. For the Arabs, it was a whisper of ancient greatness buried beneath their sands. Every civilization that came after used Babylon as a mirror, reflecting its own fears, ambitions, and moral lessons. By the dawn of the first millennium AD, the once great gate of the gods was silent. Only shepherds and wanderers crossed its ruins, unaware that beneath their feet lay the remains of humanity's first metropolis. Yet the memory of Babylon was too strong to die. It survived not in stone, but in myth, in language, in religion, in the collective imagination of humankind. Babylon had fallen, but its shadow stretched across eternity. Though Babylon's walls have long since crumbled and its towers turned to dust, its influence has never left the world. More than any other city of the ancient age, Babylon shaped how we understand civilization itself. It gave us the idea of empire, of a single power uniting diverse peoples under one law and one divine order. It gave us written justice in Hammurabi's code, a foundation for governance that still echoes in modern legal systems. It gave us astronomy and mathematics, time measured in hours, minutes, and seconds. It gave us myth, the creation of Marduk, the flood before Noah, the tower that reached heaven, stories that became part of every religion and every culture that followed. Babylon's ruins may lie quiet, but its voice still speaks in the rhythm of human history. The Babylonians believed they lived at the center of the cosmos, the meeting point of heaven and earth. In a way, they were right. Every empire that came after them, from Persia to Greece, from Rome to the Islamic caliphates, borrowed from Babylon's example. Its architecture inspired temples and palaces across continents. Its priests charted the stars with precision that guided sailors and scientists for millennia. Its idea of a city as both spiritual and political heart of the world became the model for every capital that followed, from Constantinople to Baghdad to London. When people dreamed of greatness, they dreamed of Babylon. Even its fall became part of its legend. To prophets and poets, Babylon was not only a place, but a warning, a symbol of human pride and divine judgment. In the Book of Revelation, Babylon the Great became the embodiment of corruption and empire's arrogance. Yet behind that moral tale lay something deeper: awe. The world could not stop speaking of Babylon because no city before or since has captured such a perfect union of power, beauty, and ambition. It was the first city that truly tried to touch the divine, and in that attempt, it became immortal. Today, the ruins of Babylon rest in modern-day Iraq, where archaeologists have uncovered its temples, gates, and inscriptions. The Ishtar Gate, painstakingly reconstructed in Berlin, still glows with deep blue bricks and golden dragons. To stand before it is to glimpse the dream of an age when humanity believed it could build eternity from clay and faith. The dust may have reclaimed the land, but the idea endures, the belief that through art, knowledge, and will, we can rise above the limits of the earth. Babylon was born from mud and ambition, ruled by kings who believed themselves chosen by the gods, and died beneath the weight of its own greatness. Yet in every story we tell of human progress and human fall, its name returns, whispered, feared, admired. The gate of the gods may have closed, but the dream it represents remains open forever. This was the story of Babylon, the city of kings, the home of Marduk, the cradle of law, and the first true empire of mankind. It rose from the river's edge to rule the known world, built gardens that defied the desert and reached toward heaven itself. It fell as all great things fall, but it left behind a legacy that no flood, no conqueror, and no god could erase. Babylon was humanity's first dream of eternity, and even now, thousands of years later, we are still chasing it.